This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats on Amazon.com. Listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible. Visit fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. This episode is brought to you by my free 3-part video series, FAM 101. Discover how to chart your cycles by tracking the 3 main fertile signs: cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical position, and ultimately develop body literacy by paying attention to your fertile signs. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to grab your free copy. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 261. Welcome to the 261st episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I've got a great episode for you today. In today's episode, I welcome back Nicole Jardim to the show. She was one of my very first guests. I feel like I interviewed her back in maybe episode 19. I will link our first episode together in the show notes page, so you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/261 at the end of the episode and tune in to the first episode that we did together years ago. But in today's episode, Nicole and I are addressing some really important topics that I often shy a little bit away from on the podcast because they're quite charged. So topics where, many individuals tend to fall on one side or the other. So we dive into diet, particularly the discussion around animal foods. We also dive into abortion, which is a really important topic. If you're listening to this in real time, this is a really difficult time in the United States where women's rights are being challenged and, in some cases threatened to be taken away. So there's some really specific motions that have come out in certain areas of the United States where women's right to access abortion is being challenged. And so we do dive into that topic today. And, with topics like these, it's often hard to have a productive and useful discussion where both sides are respectful and you actually kind of get somewhere and try to understand where both parties are coming from. But I think we do a fairly decent job of that today. And so I'm just, I know there'll be lots of conversation and discussion sparked out of this episode. If you're wanting to join us in the Fertility Friday Facebook community, you can certainly head over to fertilityfriday.com/community. When this episode airs, I will, put a post in there and I'm sure we'll have some really great discussions coming from today's episode. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Nicole. And today I'm very excited to welcome back my guest, Nicole Jardim, to the show. For those of you who have listened to the podcast for a while, you may remember Nicole was one of my very first episodes. I'll have to double check the number. I think it was maybe episode number 19 or 21 or something like that, but you were one of my first. So I'm really excited to have you back. And Nicole, for those of you who don't know, is a certified women's health coach and the creator of Fix Your Period, a series of programs that empowers women to reclaim their hormonal health using a method that combines simplicity and sass. Her incredible work has impacted the lives of hundreds of thousands of women around the world in effectively addressing a wide variety of period problems, including PMS, irregular periods, PCOS, painful periods, amenorrhea, and so much more. And Nicole is also the co-host of the Period Party podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges that women face getting adequate care, especially for their periods and reproductive health issues, and quite a bit more. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here. I feel like when we chatted in person, when we met last year, that we just hit it off right away and could not stop talking, literally. So I'm a little concerned that this episode is going to be 2 hours long.
Well, we'll keep it in check. We'll do our best. Yeah, we'll do our best. But yeah, no, whenever we get together, we have so much to talk about. And it's because we do similar work and we really, we vibe off each other because I feel your passion for addressing women issues of women's health. I think it's really obvious and apparent in everything that you do, which is why I'm really excited that we're getting to chat about these topics on air today. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I know. I completely agree with that. I'm in the same boat. I immediately sensed your insane passion for this as well.
It's like totally out of control.
I know. I'm almost a little scared for us today because we go real deep, ladies.
I know, but I think we'll be okay. And I think maybe to ground our discussion, I'm sure we talked about this in our first interview together, so I don't think we have to go too much into it, but maybe share with us just a little bit about why you're so passionate about women's health issues and why basically we're like in the trenches fighting for women's reproductive rights, essentially, is what it feels like.
I know, girl. All I can picture us is like in combat uniforms, like literally in a trench. It's what it feels like sometimes, I gotta say. Gosh, I'm so dramatic. But anyways, many, many years ago, obviously, I had serious period issues. And as a teenager, I feel like those are so normalized, almost more so than as an adult woman when you have period problems. And I remember distinctly not being able to get out of bed in the morning because I had such terrible period cramps, and my mom telling me that she had experienced even worse. So I was probably just fine. And, it was years that this kind of thing went on for. And I finally saw my doctor, and she immediately whipped out her prescription pad and wrote me a prescription for the birth control pill. And I was psyched because I was finally part of this cool kids club of people who were on the pill. And for me, that was amazing. And it actually was even more amazing because of the fact that I, within a couple of months, had very light periods, and I had no more pain, and I had no more crazy mood issues. And so all of these symptoms that I'd been experiencing had virtually disappeared. And I was thrilled at 19 to have that be my reality. And fast forward a few years, and I started to have side effects from the pill, anything from chronic UTIs to, like joint pain, hair loss, melasma on my face, like all of these symptoms. I mean, you basically named the pill list of side effects, and I practically had it. And it wasn't until I saw an acupuncturist who said to me that this could be what was causing all of these, what seemed like unrelated symptoms, because that's the most frustrating thing, is that I saw all of these different doctors, right? Like a dermatologist for my skin issues, and my gynecologist over and over again for the UTIs and the yeast infections. And then I was seeing a gut doctor because I also had horrible gut issues. So it was just like on and on you go. And he pointed out that this could potentially be problematic. And it wasn't until years later that I understood why that was in my training. And that really set me on this path. I was desperate for knowledge and to understand this. And I felt that if I wanted to know what the hell was going on in my body, I assumed other women did as well. And that was really what pushed me into starting this career in women's health coaching, because I felt this very strong desire to explain how all of this stuff works, as you probably can relate to. So yes, and here I am.
Yes, many years later. Well, I mean, it's really interesting because when you kind of started in this on your journey, essentially, like when you didn't really know it was your journey yet, when you were just trying to figure out what was going on with your body, there wasn't a big global conversation happening around periods and menstruation. So, I mean, I know what my experience has been like to see the shift, and it's been very interesting because right now it feels like periods are super famous and they're having their moment. But how have you experienced that difference between where you were at and seeking support at those early stages when you were, early teenager or late teenager, and compared to now?
Yeah, I love this so much because I really think this is a reality for millions upon millions of women all over the world. And I didn't say this, but I was born and raised in Antigua in the Caribbean, and we did not and still do not have adequate healthcare for women as far as I'm concerned, just my personal opinion. But but there are so many similarities to what I experienced and what a teenager in America or Canada or another industrialized nation would experience even now. And that is that you see your doctor after potentially years of having these health problems, and they maybe hear what you have to say for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then they make the recommendation of some form of hormonal birth control. And that really is the go-to solution to a whole range of these issues. And that I've always said this, I feel like that is the biggest flaw when it comes to modern medicine, because we are just band-aiding the fact that women are experiencing a plethora of problems that are really indicative of underlying hormonal issues, inflammation, gut health problems, nutrient deficiencies, environmental factors like, xenoestrogens and things like that. And then just like letting them go about their business and for years on end. And so for me, that's exactly what happened. And man, I could have avoided a lot of pain and suffering if I had been like you and as a teenager thought, oh, no, this pill thing doesn't sound so great. But at the time it was like my period panacea. Like I was so excited to feel better again. It never even occurred to me that there was, some scary things happening below the surface. But yeah, so ultimately what I would say is that I think across the board, this is women's experience, and we're never really taught to just dig a little bit deeper, sort of become our own period detectives and like figure out what's happening below the surface and actually take back our power in regards to how our bodies function. I think women are told one of two things. It's either, well, your body's kind of broken and this is the fix, or this is just a normal part of being a woman, and this is also the fix. Mm-hmm. That's really the gist of it.
Well, and then how do we as women, so it's interesting because you and I had very different experiences around the same age. We both had period issues. I was convinced that the pill wasn't going to solve it, and I was a little bit afraid of it because I was afraid that I was going to have trouble getting pregnant like well into the future when I was ready. But I think most women, or a lot of women, fall into the category of like, man, this is amazing. Like before I had all these period issues, this pill thing is helping me. And ultimately, it's what you said, when women go to the doctor, the pill is what they're given. And that's been kind of the central focus of, this podcast and a lot of your work, because it doesn't actually fix anything. And I find, so, I'm curious about your experience too. When you talk about the pill, it's kind of controversial when you're not bigging it up, when you're calling it out for the side effects, for the very real experiences that women face. And there's this kind of idea that, well, first of all, yeah, women's pain is normal and all that kind of stuff is normal. But then the pill side effects, it's almost as though it's either not real or only some women experience it, or it's really not that bad, or whatever the case. And even for women that are starting to recognize that the pill isn't the solution, we're still very vocal. Okay, but women need it because there's women who, for instance, endometriosis, the pill is basically used as treatment, though it doesn't treat anything. So maybe share with us, for the women who are listening who do struggle with period issues or do struggle with something more serious like endometriosis, what are we supposed to do? How do we get adequate healthcare when the medical system is telling us really like just take the pill and that's it?
Girl, if I had $1 million.
Right?
Yeah. Or $1 for every time that question was asked. I know. What do we do? I think this is a work in progress, to be honest. I don't know that there is a simple solution because, again, coming back to women in other countries, again, forget our own countries where we are full of resources. Women in other countries have far, far less. And, in fact, I have family and friends in Antigua who potentially have endometriosis, but they don't have the financial means to come to the States or Canada or wherever to get diagnosed properly and then, potentially start treatment. So it's a real challenge, I think, for women across the world. And so what do we do? I think that for like women like us, I think that we need to be spreading the message, continue to be spreading the message far and wide, which I know you're doing with your new book and obviously with the podcast, and I am, and so many others are starting to as well. I just think we really need to. We need to be talking to school nurses and doctors and coaches even, and all of these different people, because at the end of the day, that's how systems change. And So I really think, so something like endometriosis, for instance, that is such a pervasive condition, and 1 in 10, potentially more, women have it. So this is affecting millions upon millions of women around the world, and they are, and they don't know what to do. And so doctors are still, like you said, prescribing the pill, which can potentially be helpful after an endometriosis excision surgery. And, I've seen that, and that's, potentially helpful. But otherwise, like we were just saying, it's really just, like leaving the fire to burn and the alarm bells going off and, shutting the door and walking away from the house if we just prescribe the pill and don't offer any other solutions. And so I really think that, first of all, there's like a 6 to 12 year average window for diagnosis for women from the onset of symptoms. And so I think screening for a condition like this, or another condition like adenomyosis, for instance, would be ideal probably soon after puberty. So that's really what needs to happen, I think personally, is that from the get-go, we need to be screening girls and teenagers for these conditions. And I think the other problem too is that there is no real good way to diagnose. Like if you look at all the studies, and this too, if you look at all the studies, you can see that the diagnostic criteria for these kinds of conditions is vague and totally all over the place. And right.
Well, and then you have to basically make an incision into a woman to get a diagnosis because the ultrasound isn't reliable.
Girl,
you can't rule it out.
The other thing. Yeah. I mean, are you kidding? So this is right. So we have that problem as well. And so I really think that the screening component of things needs to be based on info gathering skills and sort of your clinical skills around like creating a picture of what's going on with this girl or this woman's health. And that's, again, where coaches and people like you really come in, because that's what we do. It's our expertise. And that to me is the only way, I think, to get a good picture of what could potentially be going on, so that then we can, or someone else can refer them to an experienced endometriosis specialist. And like you just said too, for a lot of people don't realize this. And I hear this a lot, and I bet you do as well, that women come to me and they say, well, I was diagnosed with endometriosis, or I was told I have endometriosis. And I said, well, how were you diagnosed? Well, my doctor did an ultrasound, or my doctor did a pelvic exam, or my doctor did an MRI. And I'm like, well, potentially, especially if your symptoms match up, but unfortunately, the only way to be diagnosed is through a laparoscopic surgery, which means that you are cutting into your body and taking a look at what's going on inside. And so many of them are just completely shocked by that.
Well, and I think with endometriosis, I feel like it's also complicated in the sense that, okay, so let's say that you have really adequate care. Because one of the things that strikes me is that over the years, I've spoken with so many women that have different types of pelvic pain, women that have pain with their periods, women that have pain outside of their menstruation, women that have pain after sex or during sex or things like that. Signs that would basically indicate that at least someone should be asking the question. Like, you can't make a diagnosis because someone has pain, but you can say like, okay, but you're having this pain, you're having it consistently, it's not in line with your period, like, could this be more? And what often strikes me is that a lot of physicians don't even ask the question. I've spoken to women who've had pain for years. They describe their period pain as just completely out of control, 9 to 10 on the pain scale out of 10. And no one has ever even said the word endometriosis to them. And I'm always like, what's going on? Okay, but let's assume that this woman, she has good care. She's got a doctor who asked the question, did the laparoscopic surgery because she obviously has access to that. She's able to afford, that it's covered of her healthcare, whatever the case is. But the challenge, I suppose, that I see is that the solution that Western medicine offers is surgery. That's it.
Right.
So even that is problematic, because we can talk about the importance of getting a diagnosis and all of that. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think that maybe you could speak to some of the way that we think about how to care for these conditions. because every single woman doesn't necessarily want surgery for a solution. Some women have surgery and then they didn't address the conditions that allowed this condition to progress in the first place, so it returns.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is a very important conversation just about how, even to go as far to say that Western medicine isn't always equipped to properly handle women's healthcare issues. It doesn't really address the root of the issue, right?
To say the least. Yeah. I mean, yes, it's alarming, in fact, that we are in the situation that we're in, because I feel like, again, this is just indicative of the fact that women's pain generally is ignored more than men's pain is. In fact, I even saw an article the other day about girls' pain being ignored over boys' pain, and in fact, not taken as seriously. So this gender bias starts really young, which is very unfortunate. And I just think that we, as a society, have got to shift the way we are doing medicine, and that's happening. It's happening on a slow, sort of a slow uptick, but it's definitely happening. And especially when it comes to women's healthcare, I've just, found over and over again, as you probably have too, that these issues just go on and on forever and ever. And women are, their intuition is literally screaming at them, and they're seeing doctor after doctor and being, almost gaslighted in a way, and said that, what they're experiencing either isn't real or it's totally normal, or whatever they're being told that's not in line with what their gut is really telling them. And so, if there's anything you take away from this conversation, I think that take away that your intuition about what's going on with your body is usually correct. And do not ignore that. Don't ignore the fire as it's burning, because it does have long-lasting implications for your health, your fertility. We could go on and on. Like, being on the birth control pill really does impact all aspects of your health, from your bones to your heart to your brain. I mean, these are, again, like, we're not thinking about this stuff when we're 16 or 18, but what happens 20, 30 years from now is, potentially irreversible. And I'm not being alarmist. I'm not trying to scare people, but I really think it's that serious that we need to understand it. And so I don't know. I feel like I totally went off on a tangent.
Well, I
don't
feel like
even know what you asked me.
That's what it's all about, Nicole. Because today, but no, I think as you were talking, there was a couple thoughts that came through my mind, just in terms of how healthcare doesn't adequately address really the issues that women have. And since we're talking about endo, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is because that's kind of one of the central arguments about hormonal birth control. And I'm sure that you do the same. I always clarify my point. I'm not saying that no one should ever use it. And I'm not saying that it doesn't have its place, because it certainly does. And I think that, but really it's all about like knowing what the side effects are and all of that, knowing what it's doing. So I'm going to pose a question, I suppose, like another one of those unanswerable questions.
Great.
Right. But for a woman with endometriosis, when we're saying like the pill is this, like we need to have the pill because that is helping her to manage her pain, which is true for many women. That is how they manage. That is how they're able to live their daily lives, because without it, it's really debilitating. And they I can really resonate with that. I had super painful periods, and it's not even to scratch the surface of the experiences of, many women with endo. But with that said, women with endo who are on the pill, it's not like they're any less likely to have side effects. So the challenge then, and the unanswerable question is, is this the best we can do?
Oh, you literally took the words right out my mouth. I was just thinking the same damn thing. I was just thinking, what, is this really it? This can't be it.
Right. So if we can't talk about the pill critically, if we can't say like simultaneously, yes, women need it because it's the only thing that's helping them manage their pain, but we can't ask the question like, why isn't there anything better?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is there anything better already?
Well, this is, hello. Yes. So this is what I think we bring to the table as alternative, holistic practitioners, coaches, people, all the people who do similar work to what we do. I think it's so complementary to the medical doctors and what they offer. And, again, like, I just want everyone to know, I wrote on Instagram today about, needing prednisone last year, when you saw me, I'd had an allergic reaction to a medication and I needed prednisone, blah, 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 blah. So I don't want to bash medicine or anything like that, because obviously it has a place, but I think that line has been crossed on too many occasions, and we need to figure out where that place is and where the place is for alternative treatments. And so, like, when you think about endometriosis, for instance, again, we keep coming back to it, but I think it's just because it is so front and center right now, is that when you look at the research on endo and the fact that it has sort of hallmarks of an autoimmune disease, and in fact, it occurs in conjunction with autoimmune conditions, things like rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel diseases and multiple sclerosis, like that in and of itself should be like, ding, ding, ding. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this occurs in conjunction with these other autoimmune conditions. What if we treated the inflammatory response? Like, what if we looked at a woman's gut health, for instance? Obviously, your gut is sort of the epicenter of everything, basically. And so what if we looked at that and figured out what was going on there? What if we looked at her liver and help to optimize that and figure out like how we could, get it working as best as possible to remove toxins that are potentially triggering more inflammation? And how could we look at her overall diet and what's going on in her life emotionally? Like, why wouldn't we look at all of these things if all of those things contribute to your overall health? I think that that's ultimately the problem, is that approach has still not really gone mainstream for a number of reasons, which will remain unnamed. And really, like, why are we not looking at that? Why are we not looking at the fact that there, with endometriosis, there are many cases of women who are estrogen dominant or have, impaired estrogen detoxification. Like, we've seen that. We see that on Dutch test hormone results. And Dutch test is dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. And so that's looking at your hormone metabolites. And it can see that if you are favoring sort of the preferable estrogens or the potentially proliferative, potentially harmful estrogens. So you can actually see that. And I've seen that in clients with endometriosis, that their bodies tend to prefer the potentially harmful estrogen metabolite pathways. And so if we can address what pathways those estrogen metabolites are going down and potentially put them into the more favorable pathways, could we reduce the effects of endometriosis? And I've done that with clients, and I've seen plenty of people do that. So why is that not the treatment that is offered in conjunction with the surgery? Because the surgery is definitely necessary in many, many instances. So I would never discount that by any means. But then, like, it grows back, like you said. And so then what? Mm-hmm. I mean, women can't just keep getting surgery after surgery, but that seems to be what's on offer.
Well, and I mean, surgery doesn't come without any type of risks or consequences. And, right. I think that it's having this conversation and recognizing more than one modality. I feel like it's really important as women to recognize that Western medicine represents one modality that we need, but it's not always like the specific treatments by themselves. They were never really designed to address the root of any issue. Like, when you go in and cut out a problem, we're not asking the question of why it's there. And so what you were talking about is like, why aren't we asking these questions? Why aren't we looking at, the way that our bodies are processing estrogen? Why aren't we looking at dietary sources of inflammation? Why aren't we looking at all these basic things? And I had a really interesting interview about exposure to xenoestrogenic chemicals. When babies in utero are exposed to all of these xenoestrogenic chemicals, particularly the ones that are advertised to women in every single beauty product we ever buy, babies in utero, then that if they're exposed to that, those types of substances around the time that their uterus is in a certain stage of development, they're more likely to, develop endometriosis later in life. So there's kind of like this idea that if you get endo, you're just unlucky, or you just had a genetic predisposition to it. Because that's kind of how Western medicine looks at illness, right? If you have a certain illness, it's because your parents had it or your family had it. And we're not even looking at the fact that our environment has changed significantly. And there's so many more pollutants and we're exposed to so much more. Like, we're just going to not talk about the elephants in the room, many elephants. So I feel like endometriosis is an interesting place for us to hang out today and talk about, because it really highlights a lot of the ways that we're just not like, it's like we have our head in a little box or something, and we're really just not looking around to see what is contributing to these issues. What we should be asking, why do 10% of women have endo? Why do so many women experience excruciatingly painful periods every month? And why do we think that that's normal?
Oh my goodness, I could not agree with you more. I know what you said. I almost laughed out loud when you were like, the many elephants in the room. And
because it's not just one, ladies.
Geez, yeah, there are a few. I know. I feel like we could really go there, and I'm a little scared, but I think it's necessary. I agree with what you're saying about the in utero, that hypothesis that potentially there are, essentially like issues that come up in utero that are causing these problems later on. And I think too, like we can talk about the fact that how kids are being raised right now. I don't have kids, so I know I'm no authority on this by any means, but I observe. And what I do observe is first of all, children have an alarmingly high rate of ADD, ADHD, sort of behavioral problems, skin problems, gut health issues. They can't sleep. Like, I am just floored by the incidence of these issues. And because all of my friends have kids, and I know lots of people with kids, and of course I read a lot. So I find it astounding. And I don't see how there is no connection to children's diets and their lifestyles and their screen time to all of these issues in childhood, and then subsequently as teenagers and adults. Like, I really think that a child's diet, a girl's diet, will impact what happens with her, post puberty, what happens once she gets her period and the symptoms she experiences. I don't know. I haven't really looked at any studies on that, or if there are any, I'm not even sure. Maybe but I feel like that's a huge thing that is just overlooked.
Well, it's a very interesting time that we're living in. It feels as though, so when I was growing up, it felt like we were all really sure about what we're supposed to be eating. So when I was growing up in like the 80s and the 90s, it was more like the government told you to eat these things, and people did.
Yes.
And everyone obliged, and there wasn't really a conversation around like what we should be eating like there is now. It was like everyone was really sure that we should get rid of the saturated fats. We should use vegetable oil for cooking. Like, everyone was really certain of these things. Like, we should drink skim milk, etc. And so now we have all of these. So what seems like, so this is just my interpretation of it. Like, if someone was looking in, it seems like we tried it your way, government, and it's not really working out for us. And so now we're trying to figure out what works. But there's all these different voices that are saying this is healthy, that is healthy. You can talk to 10 different people that say they eat healthy and see 10 different diets. And so one of the challenges that you're highlighting, I mean, I'm a parent, I've got 2 kids, like what needs to happen, I think, is we kind of need to actually look at what the research says about, what foods are going to build healthy children, what foods are going to support hormone health, what foods are going to support healthy menstrual cycle, what foods are not, and really try to kind of get back to the basics of what actually makes a healthy diet. There's so much debate there. And as you know, Nicole, because you jump right into the controversy when it comes to diet. But so for the women who's listening, and so because we're talking about period problems and hormone health, and that's our area of focus, I think that when we're talking about diet and what to eat and what to do and, how to kind of organize our lives around this issue, it's really about supporting hormonal health. So maybe you can speak to that and how a lot of the recommendations, dietary and otherwise, don't really match what would be optimal for our hormonal health.
Yeah. And I should obviously clarify that this is certainly not a blame game by any means. And I understand that there's a lot of confusion out there. I'm certainly not saying that, people should be eating a certain way or should not be eating a certain way. I'm just saying that there has to be a correlation between how, first of all, like what is happening during pregnancy and then throughout childhood that's causing such a large amount of young women to have these issues. That's just, again, like my own hypothesis. But yeah, like I agree with what you're saying, that we have a situation in our hands where the internet has just made all kinds of information available and people are super confused. And there's studies that constantly come out saying that this food is good and then it's bad and then it's good again. And like you said, the 80s, it was pretty straightforward and we just did what we were told and that was it. And now, now it's like fat's bad or fat's good now. And saturated fat is, it's still kind of bad, but sometimes good. So yeah, it's extremely confusing. There's no doubt about that. I think ultimately when it comes to your diet, you have to be discerning and figure out like what feels good for you. Like, how do you feel when you eat? Forget what everyone is telling you to eat, because, I had a friend recently, her sister was on a keto diet, and it was because her partner was on a keto diet, and he insisted that it works for everyone and that it worked really well for him and that it was going to work for her.
And men and women are just the same.
Yeah, right. Because, right, exactly. Biologically, we're totally the same. Not. But she felt terrible. Like she was actually, her hormones were a complete mess. I looked at her hormone tests. They were all over the place. And I remember thinking, okay, this is a perfect example of why we cannot be listening. It's almost like you have to put your head down and put your earphones on and not listen to what everyone's saying and just get back to the basics. Like, can we just have, a plate that has a third to a half of your plate having veggies on it, some kind of complex carbohydrate, whether that's sweet potato or potatoes or maybe some quinoa or rice or something like that, and then like have a small portion of some kind of animal protein and healthy fat. And I know not everyone eats animal protein, that's fine, but that's just what I advocate for because it really does help for hormones in my experience. So just so everyone knows, I'm going to preface it by saying that everyone's different, but why can't we just get back to that simple way of eating? I feel like if we can do that and then see how we feel physically and mentally after we've eaten, like, are you totally crashing after an hour after you eat? Do you have massive sugar cravings or caffeine cravings in the mid-morning and mid-afternoon or late afternoon? Do you have energy dips throughout the day? Do you have trouble sleeping or trouble waking up? All of these are signs that what you're eating is not working for you. If your period, of course, we're going to talk about that too. If your period is haywire all over the place, it's irregular, or you're not getting it at all. I mean, because that's what happened to my friend's sister. So her period pretty much disappeared on this keto diet. And I hear that over and over again. You really have to pay attention to this. And this comes back to body literacy and really understanding how your own body works. Because it's sort of that 80s mentality, right? We've been told what to think and how to approach our health. And that hasn't changed very much. Like, we're at the point now where individualized medicine and healthcare is really going to be the future. It's now at the forefront. And I think we all have to jump on that bandwagon and get to the point where we know our bodies intimately and we are aware of when something is not working for us. Like I distinctly remember years ago, I was in a long distance relationship and I was traveling back and forth to Europe, which was insane. And now that I think back, I'm like, wow. But anyway, the point is that, it was like, I was away for like a month and I come back and I traveled through 3 countries and it was a terrible flying experience. It was just a very stressful day. It had been a very stressful trip. And the jet lag and all the things. And I was like day 13 of my cycle, I think. And I started spotting. And I thought, okay, maybe that's ovulation spotting. Yeah, no, not so much. And I spotted until for the rest of my cycle. And it was like a 24 or 25 day cycle, super, super short, not at all in my norm. But my body was just like, Nicole, get a hold of yourself. Like, this is crazy. But women live with this, month after month after month. And so what we have to come back to is being intimately aware of our body's language, our body's signals. And that really, I think, is what will guide how you eat, or what should guide how you eat.
Mm-hmm. Well, I couldn't agree more. I think the conversation around keto diets is really interesting because there's so many different reasons why people adapt different diets. And there's so many different ways that people do that. So for instance, when you think keto, you think meat and fat. And I think a lot of women find themselves under eating on keto. So, because some women who have issues with blood sugar regulation, if they are working with a nutritionist who can support them to ensure they're getting sufficient calories, and you know what I mean? Like, I'm not advocating for keto, but I'm just saying that, like, I think one of the things that I've observed a lot with the women that I work with is sometimes they don't eat enough food. And especially when they're trying to like cut the carbs, it's like they cut the carbs without a contingency plan.
Yes,
like you can't just
totally.
like cut the carbs. And you have to understand what a carbohydrate is. Like we actually need to eat carbohydrates, right? In order to survive, because you can't just eat fat and meat. And if you do choose to do that, like there are traditional populations that basically did eat fat and meat, but they were eating so much fat. This is not something that we would do in a Western culture. Like you're not eating seal blubber. So this isn't right. So
That's
it's like,
a fact.
yeah. So I feel like I like to kind of hang out there a little bit, because one of the things I've often seen is this. I mean, we're still living in the world where as women, our bodies are highly policed, and anything other than a really super thin body isn't really celebrated a whole lot, right? And so there's a lot of reasons why women opt for the diets that they do. And there's a lot of men's fitness influencers that talk about these diets and intermittent fasting. But as women, we have menstrual cycles that basically tell us if we're doing it right.
Right.
And so in the work that we are doing, so I think I just want to say that, because there's ways to do, if there's a certain type of way that you want to eat, there's ways to do it correctly. But since the vast majority of us aren't skilled nutritionists, many of us, it's very easy to do keto wrong. It's very easy to try to do low carb and just not eat enough food, and then end up inadvertently starving yourself and losing your period and blaming the diet. But really, I mean, this is like, anyways, I think you see what I'm saying. I feel like in our work, when the menstrual cycle or the period is the center of your focus, it's harder to go completely off the rails. It's like what you were saying earlier with regards to, you know, when you're eating a certain way, it really doesn't matter what everybody says. What matters is how you feel. And I would add to that as well. What matters is also how your cycles respond to it. And ultimately, you don't hear me advocating for one diet or another, one fad or another, because it doesn't work. Some women do really great with dairy. Some women can't have dairy. Some women do really great with gluten. Some women can't have gluten, right? Some women do good on keto. Some women absolutely cannot even think about doing keto. And so it really comes down to trusting your intuition. So how do you support your clients to tune into that, to kind of tune out the noise of the world and really tune into, like, people can tell you, like, this is the healthiest food ever, you need to eat it all the time, but you could fully not even be able to eat a bite of it because it really doesn't agree with you.
Yes. A friend of mine once said something along the lines of, like, you have bright, shiny object syndrome. And it's true, right? Like, we have bright, shiny diet syndrome and in our society. And it's really true. And I get it. I've been there. I mean, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. Like, I remember Snackwells and Slim Fast and all that junk. And I know you do too. Yeah. My mom must have done like a Slim Fast diet, like once a month, kind of thing. And every Monday she was starting something new. And that's, you grow up with that. And that mentality stays with you for a really long time. And, I mentioned this on another interview where I felt like women are, we're so focused on weight loss that even like birth control side effects, for instance, we're not talking about the fact that, like, there's clitoral shrinkage, or that there's vaginal tissue atrophy, or that it impacts your brain in immeasurable ways, or that, it makes your bones brittle. We're talking about the fact that, like, it makes you put on weight.
Yes.
How ass backwards our society is. Like, it's just insane that we don't give a shit about those things, but we really care about those 5 pounds. God damn it. We're not going to put on those 5 pounds. So messed up. And so I always say to women, like, this whole like ideal weight thing, what does that even mean? Like, what does that look like? Because we've been so focused since we're teenagers, likely, on being whatever, 120 pounds or whatever it is.
Regardless of your height.
Regardless of your height.
If I was 120 pounds, oh my gosh, I'm 5'7", it couldn't work.
Yeah, I'm like 5'6". I have been 120 pounds, and I remember
me
thinking,
too.
wow, I look so super skinny. You remember those days?
I remember once I went down to 124, but it was like the most, if I look back at my 20s, it was one of the most stressful times. I wasn't eating, like, it was a bad kind of time for me. And I looked like I was, bones, a bag of bones.
Yeah, skin and bones. Totally. I did too. At the time, I was like, oh, this is awesome.
I didn't think it was awesome. I was like, right? Oh my gosh, I could see my bones.
I was into that. But hey, whatever. We've all got our thing. But I really encourage women to think about what their actual ideal weight is. Like your body settles on an ideal weight. Like mine is somewhere around 130 pounds. Like it does not really veer off from that very much. And I had to be super stressed in a long distance relationship, like traveling all over the place, trying to start a business. And that's where how 120 happened. And so I just think that if you have all of these external factors that are potentially contributing to what's happening with your weight, like that's what's going on there. You have to figure out like what your body actually wants to weigh. And the only way to do that is to pay attention to what it is that you're eating, pay attention to the psychological stress in your life, and fundamentally look at your whole body as a system. And that does require you to work with someone, whether it's a nutritionist or a functional medicine doctor or a health coach of some kind, someone who is going to monitor what it is that you're doing and really guide you. And I think we've just gone so far off course in that we've kind of lost the plot a little bit. Like we don't really know what's going on with us because we've been told from such a young age to distrust what our bodies are telling us, right? I mean, you go to the doctor at such a young age, if you're 4 or 5 for a cold, and they tell you to, they tell your parents obviously to put you on this medication or whatever, or this antibiotic and whatnot. And from there on out, you're taking orders from someone else. You're taking instructions from someone else about how to take care of your body. This person doesn't know you, doesn't know your circumstances, or what's going on with you. I mean, they do for the most part, but like they don't really know your individual biology. And so basically women in their 20s and 30s are doing the same thing, and 40s and whatnot. They're going to someone else to get advice on how to take care of themselves, when in fact they have a lot of the answers, but they've just sort of shut down that intuitive conversation a long time ago because someone else was telling them what to do. So I think
we could take that a step further, because in addition to what you're saying, women are often, it's hard for us to ignore intuition forever because it keeps banging on the door, right? So there's a lot of women who then their intuition takes them to the doctor because they're saying, I have this issue, it's not going away, whatever it is. And in addition to kind of being told what to do, you're also being told to ignore your own intuition, or that it's wrong, or that, no, you couldn't possibly feel that way. Oh, you're too young. I've heard that a couple times recently. You're too young to have period issues. You're too young to have whatever, or whatever the case is. So not only are they being told what to do, but systemically just dismissed over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And to kind of turn the corner on our conversation and kind of highlight one of, I think, the scariest ways that this, like, not only are we told that we're wrong and told that dismissed and kind of told what to do and told how to manage our conditions and basically given a pat on the head and told to go about our merry way, the political climate in the States is such that, their laws are enacted to prevent you from having dominion over your body, right? So you can't even decide what you can do if you get pregnant and those types of things. So I don't know how much we want to go there, but I feel like this is a very interesting climate for women. On one hand, women have made so many gains in the world. There's a lot of prominent women. We have power, right? We have influence. We have money now. There's a huge shift in the last 100 years in terms of, as women, like our agency. But with that said, there's still a long, long, long way to go in terms of true equality.
Oh, I know. Where do I even begin? I mean, this is one of those elephants in the room. And I guess we can dive right in. I talked about abortion on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and I got the equivalent of hate mail. It was really interesting. And I've always been so pro women. I mean, like, I'm a card carrying feminist to the nth degree. And no one has ever accused me ever of being anti-woman or anti-women's health. And that was basically the accusations that were leveled at me based on my support of a woman's right to be able to choose what she does with her body, her uterus. And for the life of me, I can't understand how any one of us could impose our own moral beliefs on another person. I don't really get it. I mean, it's the law in America, the federal law, at least. And I know it's being undermined, and I know that my stance is probably not popular with a number of people, at least in the US. I don't know what the consensus is in Canada. And I know that obviously abortion is legal and relatively widely available, but in the US, it's just becoming more and more restricted. And I'm definitely fearful of that, because it's not just about abortion. It's not just about terminating a pregnancy. It's about so much more than that for women. And what else is going to be restricted? Like, how else do we not have, like you said, agency over our bodies? And it's a really big concern, because it's really not just about that. It's about so many other aspects of women's health. And I'm, like I said, I'm just concerned.
Well, it seems like there's so many ways that the power is being taken out of our hands. I mean, I go on and on and on about hormonal birth control because of the climate around it. The fact that we're not educated about our bodies, the fact that we're not provided the most basic information about our health, about our fertility, so that we can't make these decisions. And in its place, like in place of that education, we're given a pill that basically shuts down our natural reproductive hormonal system. And that it kind of sets us in opposition to our fertility. We never really understand it. We shut it down. We don't really get to experience it. And so I feel like that's a very interesting aspect of this conversation. And then you think about so when a woman does get pregnant, all of a sudden her body is not hers anymore, because she doesn't get to decide what to do about that, right? And
exactly.
In Canada, it's different because it is legal. But I would say that if anything, the issue would be access, because it really depends on, are there physicians that are trained in doing it? Even if something is legal, if you don't have enough physicians that are trained in it, if you don't have access in your area, or if you have to drive quite a long way to gain access, or fly or something like that. If you go, I'm not sure. I don't know what it's like in the States, because I've never lived in the States, but there's typically outside of every abortion clinic picketers. So even if you go, you have to walk through all the pictures of all of the things and the shouts of different things, whatever. So I just want to hear your thoughts on this, Nicole. So I had an interesting conversation with a woman who is like pro-life, and it was like a really good conversation, because we were actually like sharing our perspectives in a very, respectful way, because we respect each other, which is really
refreshing.
Well, yeah, because it's really helpful to try to understand where everybody's coming from, but you can't do that unless you can actually talk to each other in a respectful way. But in that particular conversation, what was really interesting, and I'd never thought of it before, was that one of the concerns is sometimes if, like, for instance, if you're, you're open to a woman's right to choose, are you as open to her choice to keep the baby or not? It's a complicated discussion, right? So there's some women who actually are really conflicted and maybe are on the side of like, I think I want to keep this, but maybe they're really young, and maybe they're in a situation where everyone around them is telling them to abort.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so I never thought about it that way before. And I thought, well, I could, like, it just never occurred to me that, you could have people fully dissuading certain women from having children at certain points of their life and not really giving them that option. Like, because it's legitimately supposed to be the option is yours. Right. What are you going to do? What feels right to you?
Yes. I really like that. I would agree with that. I think that, at least in the US, I think that for women who find themselves in that situation, I think for the most part, there's no real social safety net for women who or teenagers who potentially find themselves pregnant unexpectedly and want to keep the baby, but then are being told that this is this is the option. And where do they even turn? Yeah. So I agree with that. I think that on all sides of this, a woman a girl needs to be able to make the decision for herself. And, again, if you're under 18, there's parents involved. So there's that whole thing. And I would, of course, I don't know, like, what do you do? Because I think parents are, wanting to make what they feel is the right decision for their child or their daughter. So I don't know, like, what you do in a situation like that. But I agree. I understand what this person who you had a conversation with is saying. I just don't know. It's so complicated. Like, I just don't know how far we go again, it goes to so many things. It speaks to so many things.
Well, because it's such a complicated topic. And I think that part of the issue is that we can't talk about it. So it's always like, it comes across like, because basically, I mean, in terms of my personal stance, every woman has to decide what she needs to do. And I believe not only should women have the rights, but the access. If you choose to terminate pregnancy, at the end of the day, the only thing that restricting access to abortion does is create really unsafe situations for women. If a woman is pregnant and she's not in a position to have that baby, and she doesn't have access to abortion, it's quite easy for that to become a very desperate situation where she's willing to do dangerous things to get that done. So ultimately, we need to, my personal stance is that women need to have access to healthcare. If you choose to terminate a pregnancy, you need to have access to proper healthcare so that you're safe. That's my personal opinion. And I don't know if I've ever talked about it on air, because I've never really talked about abortion on air. But with that being said, I think I have a kind of I see this as a bigger issue, because and this is pretty controversial. So I think this will probably be the last topic for today, because we'll run out of time. But like, when you think about, so everything that we work towards improving women's health, her fertility. When you learn about what the research has to say, the best time for women to conceive is not when they're 45. Our bodies are kind of designed in this way that's highly inconvenient for the current time, right? It's highly inconvenient for our most fertile years to be in our late teens, early 20s, because it just does not align with the culture and the climate that we're in today. And so one of the reasons why we need to have access to abortion is because pregnancy for many women at a young age is completely detrimental to their future, potentially.
Yeah.
Now that's controversial, right? But that's the reality for a lot of women. It's
our biological reality. I know. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So anyways, that's more of like the high level perspective. Because I mean, what if the world was different? What if it wasn't detrimental? What if we supported women? What if we supported fertility? What if we acknowledged that this is a natural part of womanhood, a natural part of human nature and society to have babies? What if we supported young mothers? What, you know what I mean? How would the world be different then?
I know. I couldn't agree with you more. And, it comes back to what you were saying about, like I said, I don't feel like this is just about abortion, obviously. This is about how we learn about our bodies from the get-go. Like the fact that there is no comprehensive sex education, body literacy education in our country. I'm not sure about Canada, but it's definitely not here. No, like you said, we don't talk about this at all. So we're just handed a pill or some other form of birth control and sent on our way without ever having an understanding of how we actually get pregnant. And how would that change our society? How would that change the prevalence of accidental pregnancies? It could be incredible when you think about how much that would shift. And because women would have an understanding and they would know that they can get pregnant or can't get pregnant on a certain day of their cycle. And then, I just feel like that would have such far-reaching effects that alone would be immensely helpful in this, what I consider to be a bit of a battleground right now, at least in the US.
Well, and I'm sure that you saw that article that came out recently where the woman went on blast and she basically called out all men. And she's like, women don't get themselves pregnant. It's like, mind your sperm, dude. Like, there's, if every man just like stopped ejaculating inside of women, like if you just like, you know what I mean? If every man just stopped doing that, imagine how anyways. So I'm just curious. I feel like this is a nice, fun place to end, but do you have an opinion about this? Because all we've been talking about is women. And I think it's important to highlight, well, of course we are, but I think it's important to highlight, like, our culture really puts the entire responsibility of pregnancy prevention, all of that on women. So men don't have to do anything. And we're supposed to be taking these hormones that have all of these detrimental effects. Literally, books are being written right now and have been written and are just recently released on all of the effects of the pill on the body. Like, you can literally write books on all of the symptoms and whatever. But there's like nothing for men.
Yeah, dude. There isn't. I know it really is kind of astounding to me, but yes, I loved that woman. I believe she was a Mormon woman and she has like 6 kids or something like that. So they use that in their description of her article that she wrote. And I thought it was so great because she even proposed something along the lines of men having to get vasectomies I know, right?
Yeah,
and then having
eugenics.
them reversed when they were ready to have children. And I thought, wow, well, that's an elegant way of addressing this problem. But again, like that would never happen, because how could we ever force men to have vasectomies? But yet I feel, this is again my personal opinion, I feel like women are being cornered into making decisions that they don't that aren't right for them about their health. And it just feels really unfair. And I agree that the impetus is on women to manage birth control and pregnancy prevention. And also if they do get pregnant, it's all on them too. And it's just really unfortunate. Men play a huge role in this. They absolutely need to step it up. And I don't know what that would look like. I don't even know, because for right now, all the laws are about regulating women's reproductive health. Mm-hmm. And there's not a single law about men. Not a single one.
And I think one of the things that because I remember I watched your Instagram story and it was like, I don't remember exactly, but it was something about how there's laws. I don't know. You tell me, because I don't know the laws. Something about if a woman is raped by a man and she gets pregnant, she has to keep the baby or something.
I really should clarify that. There are no laws in America currently that make you keep a baby if you have been raped. However, there was someone who reached out to me who said to me that is what happened to her, and she is pro-life. So she chose to keep the baby and feels that, people who I know. Yeah. And that's fine. I am all for people doing what they want to do. But again, it brought up for me, well, okay, if that's what you chose, that might not be what another woman wants. And why should she have to do that? That's just my perspective on this. And maybe people disagree with that, but that's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, so we've touched on all the controversy today. It'll be very interesting to see. Well, not all of it. I think we did okay, but we definitely touched on the controversy today and shared our opinions. And that's all, like, they are our opinions. Like, I shared my opinions, you shared your opinions, and everyone who's listening has their own opinions. And so we could talk all about our opinions. I'm sure once this episode comes out, we'll have a great chat on it. Maybe we'll have some great Instagram conversations and stories about it, because I want to hear all of, the listeners' opinions as well. But at the end of the day, we were here to air this information and to talk about it, because it's really important to bring these topics into the light and to talk about them and to talk about the complexities. You might think every issue is black and white, right? But there's so much gray area. And that's why we really have to, bring it to the light and talk about it.
Oh my goodness. I could not agree with you more. Thank you so much for having me on. I think that these conversations are super hard to have. My stomach has kind of been in knots actually this whole time thinking about what we're talking about. But I do, somebody said to me on Instagram after this whole thing went down a couple of weeks ago that I was the only women's health practitioner person who is talking about abortion. And I thought that was so interesting. And nobody else is. Maybe I know people are somewhere. I don't know where. Yeah. So I just feel like we do need to talk about this in an environment that is safe and free of attacks from other people, because that doesn't solve anything as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, thank you so much for being here, Nicole. As always, it was fantastic having the opportunity to chat with you and to really hash out all these really important women's issues, and ultimately working towards empowering women to trust their intuition and to be able to make informed choices about their bodies. So thank you so much. And let the listeners know, where can they go to learn more about you, what you do, your coaching programs, and everything else.
Thanks, Lisa. It was a pleasure as always. You can find me on NicoleJardim.com, and I've got a blog there as well as on Instagram. I'm on there too, obviously. It's Nicole M, like Madeline Jardim, and on Facebook as well. So with the same handle. And my programs are NicoleJardim.com/programs. I have a couple of different options for people who are wanting to address period problems, get off of hormonal birth control, etc. So thank you again. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/261. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Nicole. It's always a pleasure when I get to chat with her. As you could tell in the interview, we have a lot of fun whenever we get together and chat. And actually, I was recently featured on the Period Party podcast. So I'll link to that episode in the show notes page, just in case you want to hear me being interviewed kind of on the flip side of the mic. One of the reasons why I think we have such great discussions when we get together is because we both share this deep passion for women's rights and women's issues. And ultimately, the work that we do is very complementary. And essentially, we're aiming to improve healthcare for women, improve access to accurate information and knowledge about menstrual cycle health, shattering myths about the menstrual cycle and about periods, that they're supposed to be painful and ridiculous, and that it's okay if you're suffering every time you have your period. And so I feel that, that's one of the reasons that we always have such great discussions, and you can hear the passion in our voices, and you can also get a sense of how much we are both jazzed about these topics and how important we both feel that they are. And so even though it was a bit of a challenge, I think, for us to just dive in and talk about some of these really controversial and difficult topics today, we both felt that it was more important for us to have the conversation than to shy away from it, and just to really dive into some of these issues and topics. And especially, abortion is one of the topics that I haven't addressed a whole lot on the podcast. I'll link my interview with Molly Dutton-Kenny, where we talked about loss. So we talked about miscarriage, stillbirth, and also abortion in the same episode. And it was a really, really powerful episode, because Molly is a doula. And one of the things that she supports her clients with is loss. And whether that is through miscarriage, whether that is actually through abortion and supporting women to have access and information to all of the different options, it was a really, really powerful episode. So if this is a topic that you're wanting to delve deeper into, then I would, suggest to kind of go back and listen to that. Because as I mentioned, it's just a really, really powerful episode. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts and your perspectives, how you feel that we address this topic today on the podcast. So again, we'll be talking about this in the Fertility Friday Facebook community. So you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/community, and you can join us in there as we, continue the conversation about these important topics. And so I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today, for tuning into the show. I really appreciate all of you for spreading the word, helping me to spread the word about the show, and for reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, former iTunes, also for tagging your friends. I see all of you on social media tagging your friends, whether it's on specific episodes or just in general. I really appreciate all of you for spreading the word about the podcast, because ultimately that is how the word gets out. That is how we reach more women and try to change the face of women's healthcare. Ultimately, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you are really getting a sense of how much is missing from the standard female healthcare in the medical system. Whether we're talking about the most basic knowledge of the menstrual cycle and just the general, how does it work? How does it function? How does ovulation happen? When are you fertile in the cycle? Just the basic understanding of how that works, to treating women's health issues specifically related to reproductive health, whether we're talking about fertility, menstrual cycle complaints like pain or, irregular abnormal cycle patterns. There's a huge, huge, huge gap in the healthcare for women. And ultimately, we bridge that gap by spreading information, knowledge, and raising awareness about how these things work. One of the ways to do that is by sharing about the podcast, because this, for many women, is their first introduction into the truth about how the female reproductive cycle works. And I'm thrilled and honored to be able to be a part of that. I mean, there's a lot more work to be done, but I suppose one of the best places to start is just by spreading the word, sharing information. And also part of my goal and attempt to spread the information was, of course, through the Fifth Vital Sign. And so if you haven't yet had an opportunity to purchase your copy, it is available in paperback, ebook, and now audiobook formats. You can grab the audiobook over at fertilityfriday.com/audible. So that will take you to the Audible link. If you've never been an Audible customer before, you can actually listen to the audiobook for free with a trial of Audible, which is fun. A great way to kind of introduce yourself to audiobooks. And also you can grab the first chapter of the fifth vital sign for free if you head over to fertilityfriday.com/vital sign. That's fertilityfriday.com/vital sign. And so with that, I want to wish you a wonderful week, a wonderful weekend, depending on when you're listening to this episode. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And I thank you for being a part of the Fertility Friday community and for helping me spread the word about the fifth vital sign, essentially how important the menstrual cycle is for overall health, why we should care about that, and why as women it's really important for us to be aware of what's happening in our bodies and to demand the care that we deserve, to demand better care from our healthcare practitioners. And so with that said, thank you again. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.